There's material. There's a gesture towards the object. A movement on the object. A motion with the material. There's a pause, a rotating gaze. Years of observing. Black holes into a minute. Final project, idiosyncratic. If I give it to you or you buy it from me, it doesn't make you a materialist. Materialism is an ugly word. Materials shaped by nimble and inspired hands. Hands that know and never know is beauty. There's movement, there's an object, there's material, there's a gesture.
Okay, so today we're going to basically, in this video, we're going to just extend on last week's stamp where we did the initials, and now we're just going to try to get a little more complex and, you know, make you do a little more sort of research rather than just, you know, figure out how to do your initials backwards. So we do what we call the cultural heritage stamp. So we're going to look for, you know, you're going to end up looking for a symbol that is not too complex, that represents, you know, sort of your background, you know, going back as far as you can to be good. So to start off, I want to, of course, make a thick slab, do the stamp on again. So, you know, I'm going to take out my block of clay, and I know I'm going to be doing it, you know, I want to end up with something that is, you know, maybe just short of an inch thick or so. For the stamp, and then so when I cut, you know, I'll take my little homemade wire tool here with the popsicle stick and the fishing line, and I'll make sure I cut down something that's already relatively thick, and then I really don't need to throw it out that much. So take that off, and then make sure I keep my clay nicely wrapped. I'm not using it, if you need any more of that. And it's always good too to really double bag it when you can to really make sure it's going to not lose any moisture. So I'm going to tap my ends here and then sort of start to throw out my slab. Now since it's already sort of longer this way, I really just want to sort of stretch it out a little bit more there until I get to about inch, so we get something that's, you know, close to a square. It doesn't have to be a square, but I'm going to sort of tap my ends and keep them compressed as I move along. And then I'm already seeing that's getting a little thin over here, and I can kind of check, see where I'm at here. So it's, you know, about 7/8. So that's about as thin as I want to get. So maybe I might want to just try to roll out the rest of that using one of the sort of handmade rollers. And so I'm going to just put some pressure here to get that to flow that way, and not really touch this side right there. So get some pressure and then get that to even out a little bit. Kind of tap and compress that and throw it out a little bit more. So I'm not really going to end up just wanting to use, you know, this sort of square part there. So then, you know, maybe just make sure that it's somewhat even. Go back and tap my ends there. A little more pressure right in there. I think that'll be pretty good. It's kind of flat enough. Try this other side right there. And then I should have a pretty good sort of slab sort of set up there. And then, you know, I can let this sort of set up and stiffen up before I even, you know, while I'm sort of looking up and printing my my image that I want to use on that, transfer on that. And so then I have one here that's been stiff up. So now this is still pretty soft, but it's a pretty good spot to sort of work from. And so, and I want it to be oversized. I want this to end up being about 4 inches and a quarter by 4 inches and a quarter, so that when it shrinks down, it's about 4 inches. And that makes a good stamp for the glass casting, and having a stamp around to, you know, put on plates or put on, you know, the side of a slab bug or something like that. So there's all these sort of different things that we can do. So, after I've done a little research and I found, you know, some image that I wanted to use, and I printed it, right? And so, you know, on a 8 by half sort of piece of paper, we want it to be printed up somewhere in the corner like that. And then I measured down the 4 1/4 and 4 1/4, you know, using my ruler. So I can now then sort of cut that out, just to make it a little more easier to use. And it's basically now sort of a template for how big my stamp should be when I cut out the slab. So then I can kind of layer it, sort of settle it on there, right, and kind of figure, okay, that's going to be good. Now, this is an old Celtic symbol. So my background is Irish, so that's one of the things I looked up. I just punched up, Googled Celtic symbols, and there's all kinds of stuff came up. But this is one of the simpler ones. I want to, you know, start with something simpler, and later on we can get more complex. But you know, let's start with something simple. So this is meant to be seen this way, the way these sort of curls are sort of going. So when I make the stamp, I want it to be backwards. So again, we had sort of talked in class about how do I transfer that on. I could cut this out and then flip it over, but I don't. But what I find easier myself is actually just to trace this with some kind of pen that bleeds through, and then I can flip it and see the sort of marks. So I'm going to use a Sharpie that's got a decent tip on it. Remember that this Sharpie will bleed through. It'll not only bleed through your paper, but it'll bleed through onto whatever surface you're working on. So make sure you have something there that it doesn't matter if it gets some ink on it. So I'm just going to have some scrap paper underneath it, and then I'm basically going to go and just stay right outside that line. Going to double check that I did get around everywhere. I believe it did. And then now I have this sort of backwards. So this symbol is a common sort of theme in like Celtic sort of heritage there of threes. And so, you know, they talk about threes often, you know, and sometimes it's the elements, earth, you know, sort of dirt, right, mud, earth, fire, wind, or death, you know, birth, death, and rebirth and stuff like that. So there's all these different things, you know, even the things that they sort of knew and could see, like the actual planet they lived in, and then, you know, they have this, the sun and the moon and all these sort of things that sort of work in threes pretty often. So now that I have that, I can flip this over, right, and I will basically, you know, I can cut this now. Maybe I will before, because this kind of has been stiffening up, and so if it gets a little bit harder, I will have a really hard time pulling the knife through that. But I have this nice square that I cut that actually works as a good template for me to be able to cut a decent sort of set of clay there. And then now, basically, I just need some sort of sharp instrument. And again, I used this in class before. This is just basically a paper clip, and then I went outside and along the concrete, just sort of ground it along like that until it was pretty sharp. So then I can just go and poke, and you don't have to go, you know, super close. Just as long as you're kind of running along the curve or running along a straight line, then once you pop it off, you'll be able to pull along that line. So you just kind of poke through. Right along that line. And it's optimum to keep your fingers on the paper, because sometimes you'll pull this off. If you don't, if you're just poking like this, and the paper will come back with you. And then what happens is, then all of a sudden you have to figure out, oh shoot, where was that again, and line it up. Now it'd be easy to line these corners up, but then you have to make sure you have it shifted in the right spot. So I'll just pop along to make sure that every quarter inch or so, I've kind of made a little mark so I know that that's how the curve is running. And I can just create a line following that curve. Then just double checking that I've pretty much got both sides, and I should be able to peel this off. And I'm going to peel it off like this to start for it and keep it right here, so in case I feel like I need to, I can go right back to that. And then now it's just a matter of connecting the dots. Once you got this line sort of set, you can go back and decide if you need to move it inwards or outwards to make it sort of look better, if you think something might be too fat or something. And then I'm going to decide, like, do I carve down and have it out, or do I carve this part out and have it sort of recess? And so I think I will carve this section out. So I'm going to put some little X's just as a reminder that that's where I want to carve. And depending on how this is, this is still maybe a little soft. I might want to let this go for a little bit before I carve that out, but then once I feel like it's stiffened up and it's going to come out nice and clean, I'll start getting in there with some of all the different tools that I need to sort of get that on. And then I can think about even doing something along this edge, because when we go to press it in, that could press in, and then maybe there's something I could do along here too after I sort of round this off to have some other kind of line, maybe even a square or even something just some marks there to make it look something interesting around it. Okay. So we want to get there, and then just start slowly carving it out. Right, so now that I have this sort of carved out, then I need to, make sure that I kind of finish it off and sort of make sure I don't have any sort of rough edges or anything that might grab either when I'm trying to cast it in this, to put the impression in the sand or into clay. So like right here, I have these sort of ridges there. So just anything that I can take, like these little bits of this gift card, and kind of scrape that flat and then come back with something and sort of clean that out. And what I found that works actually pretty well for some of this stuff is just like a pen cap. So it has that little rounded end in there. You could actually use it to carve, but also just to come back in there and sort of clean that out and make sure that my, by kind of turning it a little bit and leaning it in towards the wall, I can make sure that my walls are, sort of sloping basically out as they come in, right? So when we do this, it's different from before when sort of done, had that raised initials. We want to make sure the walls are sloping like this. This is kind of the opposite. They need to be sloping sort of down in there. So there's no overhang. So I got to go back through and sort of clean all that up and really make sure that I've got all this sort of smoothed in there too. What I found that actually kind of works well is like when you have an old pen that has, doesn't work anymore, lost its ink, and these little clickers there, if you kind of pop that out, you can have a nice little, and so especially on kind of ones that are metal, this nice sort of rounded sort of edge there that works really well. So I just found a little stick I could shove in there, so I'm having this nice little tool here, and I can go in and sort of clean up and round off and smooth my sort of edges, and then as I'm pushing against the wall, I just kind of push back a little bit here to sort of push down and sort of clean that all up. Go along, and then, without using too much water too, after I've got some of that stuff done, is just tap and kind of just sort of smooth out those edges there too with a finger and stuff like that. And then I decided to see what it might be like to sort of work on something, create another little edge there that might be interesting. So I just took that same rounded piece there, kind of started in the middle, and then sort of pushed down. Not too much, I don't want it to be too deep. But just to kind of create another little interesting thing, especially when we're stamping into clay, might leave a nice little sort of edge on our piece to kind of make it look finished. And I decided I used actually one of these dishes to kind of make this, to do a line around to carve that out, just to maybe add a little more than, besides just having that sort of thing in there. And then these two, when you pull this out of the pen that isn't working anymore, this has a nice little thing you could also use to kind of clear some stuff out, small. And then even this little rounded, ballpoint here, basically. But also it makes a nice tool for writing our name. So again, I want to carve out my name here. A pencil or Sharpie does not work. It'll burn out when we bisque fire it. But so I want to carve it out, and of course I want to use my last name because I know no one else has my last name around in this studio. And not my initials, because lots of people share my initials. It could get confusing about whose piece is whose, so I'm going to carve out my name on the back here so that I have that there. Also remember, it's really important that we dig this out, and this part actually has that overhang, right? So I can grab it easily, push it down into stuff. And then where I did this, now I have some stuff sticking out there that I'm going to want to sort of come back and sort of pull that straight. and come back with a little bit of water and sort of smooth and round off anything and get rid of anything that maybe needs to, it's going to get in the way there. Kind of round off the insides of these things, and just spend some time just finishing while it's still sort of damp before it gets too dry, and then I won't really be able to get nice clean sort of stuff. And I could take little bits of those gift cards too and cut out and use, this one's really sharp, this one's sort of rounded in there, and I can use that to kind of pull stuff out and push against the wall, make sure that they are getting sort of opened up. And I need to go back through and sort of finish them. And then the other thing I kind of want to do after I sort of clean off my sides and stuff like that is it's nice if everything is sort of rounded, so it just comes off cleaner. You don't have any sharp sides, to kind of round everything off, get rid of any sharp corners that might grab or anything like that as we're using it. And then to make this thing dry sort of more efficiently, I want to take a sharp tool like the sharpened paper clip that I sort of ground down a little bit on some concrete outside, and I'm just going to put some holes in it. And last time I did it to the sides, but it's probably better that we actually just do it from the back, because the back should never really be getting pushed into anything, so it's probably optimum that I just push in just a little bit. If you can go as far as you can without poking through or destroying any part of your design, not a bad idea. And this will just make it so that it's nice and even when it dries, because we have these little vents that air is going to be able to escape from inside out, and it'll dry more evenly and less likely to have any sort of problems that could arise in the firing, because we did that. Doesn't take long, a little bit of extra work. I used to have one student that what they just did is they did their name this way on the back of some of their thicker pieces. It always worked out pretty well. So I could go through all these sort of letters here. And just, get a nice sort of even sort of piece. All right. And this part in here isn't real important too, so I could go, poke some holes in there, or even in these sides here too. Put some holes in there. It could alleviate a lot of problems. Clay, it's super important that things dry evenly and slowly, right? We avoid a lot of problems when we sort of, take our time and so just loosely cover something when we're done with it. So after I get all my finishing done, I'll just have this sitting on a board, plastic loosely over it, let it dry slowly like that for, a few days or more, and then I'll pull the plastic off and let it dry the rest of the way. But definitely will sit like this. And you can see, we can do these great things. Here's one that I've done in the past. It's basically the same. It's a little bit different design, but it's pretty similar, right? And when we cast it in glass, we got this nice sort of optical sort of piece there that we can see through. It's cool. And then as a stamp, when I use it, take a piece of soft clay if I wanted to make much things, and I can just, push down in it, kind of rock it back a little bit thing, and then I have all these pieces raised there, and I could cut that out, right, and I could use that as my thing. And so I can do some somewhat thin. They don't have to be very thick, but if they're too thin, they likely want to curl as they're drying, so I'd rather have it be a little thicker. But you could, crank out a whole set of coasters, and because I carved this in, when I use it as a stamp in clay, I have a raised pattern, and that'd be a perfect little thing for a can or a cup or a glass or something to sit on, when you're trying to protect some nice surface, from anything that might be wet or, have condensation on it because it's a cold drink or something like that. The other one I did before, I did the Celtic harp, another, sort of Celtic symbol, and the same thing that I carved down into it. And so it'll have a raised pattern also. And that too, I could make a whole set of things, or, you know, some gifts to give out different times. So, but they need to be clean, right? You can even see that I have probably a little bit of a problem, maybe right down there where it kind of grabbed and I need to fix it. But on clay it's really easy if your stamp isn't real perfect. But when you're casting, you know, it needs to be, we need to make sure that, you know, we don't have any overhangs. So I might need to actually still fix it, although we didn't have a big problem when we cast it before, but I could probably grind that a little bit to make sure it's cleaner for next time. So there it is. There's, you know, this next assignment that we're going to work on. If you know, of course, when we have questions, we'll talk about it in class time about what, you know, the good avenues and stuff, or people trying to do something a little more complicated, we can kind of work through those problems. All right? Okay, great.